Planet Word is a celebration of that thing which separates us from the animals and I think has given us everything we are, and that is language. And I hope people will watch Planet Word and they will come away more astonished at their own gifts. We take for granted everything we do with words.
It's so closely related and yet so completely different. And I think it is language that's the thing that's most different about us. If I trained hard, I probably could bounce from tree to tree, but you could train all your life and you could never say, Betty had a bit of bitter butter and put it in her batter and made her batter bitter. Then Betty took a bit of better butter and put it in her bitter batter and made her bitter batter better. Or if you could, you'd be the wonder of the age.
So Stephen, why did you decide to make a series about language?
Well, I have to confess, in some senses it's personal. Because I'm so incompetent at anything physical, from an early age, the only thing that ever gave me any sense of power or joy or delight or pleasure was language, either from reading or from using it myself. It was my defense against bullying. It was my defense against what I saw as a hostile world dominated by people who could dance and sing and play rugby and so on. And so it for me was the most important human faculty. And I have always felt that language has been undervalued in our society. Language in every sense undervalued, both as a thing of extraordinary beauty for conveying and seducing and beguiling people, for delighting, for making us laugh, for connecting us, for bonding, but also simply as a neurological feat that separates us from the animals. It struck me that I had never seen anything on television that really addressed it, and so I thought I would love to be the one at least to have a go. It's such a massive subject, of course.
With this cauliflower walnut-like mass containing something like 100 billion neurons, we are able to think our thoughts, dream our dreams, dredge the memory banks, to translate them into words, and then get our bodies actually to speak them. But the strange thing is, we know more about the origins and workings of the universe than we do about the human brain. It's mankind's final frontier.
There's something like 6,000 to 7,000 languages on the planet at the moment. Do we have any idea why we have so many? Is there any efficiency in that?
It's a really interesting point, and all the people I spoke to agreed that it was amazing. You know, the original, not original, but one of the original myths about it is the Tower of Babel in the Bible, that as a kind of curse, God took away the original language of Adam and Eve and made them split into tribes who all spoke different languages and couldn't communicate with each other, and that this was one of the reasons that the world was a sorry place. And there have been idealists who've said, if only we spoke one language. Zamenhof in the 19th century invented the most famous of them, Esperanto, which in its own language means hopeful, hoping. He believed that there would be no world wars because people could communicate in the same language. There would be world fora in which everybody would express themselves and understand each other, and there would be no this nationalism. Clemenceau said that around this slightly later, he said, I'm a patriot, but I'm not a nationalist. And the problem with the 20th century is going to be nationalism. And someone said, well, what's the difference between being a patriot and a nationalist? He said, well, a patriot loves his country, a nationalist hates everybody else's. And I think it's very important to embrace other languages, to love them, and perhaps almost as tragic as species extinction that is going on, as we all know, rapidly around the world. So are languages, at the rate of 100 a year at least. We talk about there being 6,000 now. By 2050 or the end of the century, they could have dwindled down to under 1,000. Some people think there may be only 700 left. Now you may say that's enough, surely, but each language is a repository of the history of a people.
One of the episodes is all about really your favourite writers. Who do you love? What makes you sort of sing with the language?
Well, I mean, both high and low, really. I mean, I do adore Shakespeare, and I adore Shakespeare for the fact that he ranges between the highest possible abstract imaginings of what it is to be human and Harold Bloom, a famous American scholar, actually wrote a book called Shakespeare and the Invention of Being Human. He credits Shakespeare essentially for being the first person ever to look at humanity in the round as a complex, ambiguous character who's filled with ambiguities. And Shakespeare has that, but it also has just the most extraordinary, exultant, crunchy, gorgeous use of language and the most remarkable images that are, of course, so stitched into our language that we're not even aware we're using them sometimes. And of course James Joyce, the Dublin writer who spent most of his life abroad in Europe, but whose most celebrated work is One Day in the life of Dublin. Bloomsday, as it's known here.
Yeah, for Ulysses, obviously, for those who don't know.
The novel is Ulysses, indeed.
Yeah.
And I was lucky enough to ride around Dublin with Senator David Norris, who's a great Joycean, and he kind of read bits of Ulysses and I think communicated some of the amazing sort of almost textural crunch of the language.
You know, if one had to say the top highlights from the experience of the year's filming on either people or experiences.
Well, one of the most amazing ones, and it really will, I will never forget it, was meeting this extraordinary linguist about whom very few people know, who transformed the Chinese language. And the Chinese language was made up of characters, and is of course made up of characters as we all recognise them, but they're not phonetic, which meant that China had a terrible problem with literacy, because every Chinese person has to learn every single character, both what it means and how to say it. And how you say it is difficult because it's all pictures and so on. Anyway, this linguist was given the job by Mao of trying to Romanize, to find a way of putting Chinese into a phonetic alphabet, like the Roman alphabet, the one we use. And he did so. And we went to Beijing, and he lived in a very modest little flat, basically the size of this room, and he shuffled in, and he was 106 years old, and his first words to me were, "You'll have to forgive me, my English is a little rusty these days." And there I was in the presence of a man who transforms China, really, because within a very short time, from there being 80% of the population being illiterate, 80% of the population were literate. And if you go around China now, you see that there's always the pinyin, which is the name of the sort of language he invented, the way of transcribing Chinese. So that was amazing.
Yeah.
He's a 106-year-old man who had never been filmed before, incidentally.
Yes. And how many of these hours do we have to look forward to?
There are 5 programs, each looking at a slightly different sort of approach to language, whether it be the abuse and use of language, whether it be language dying, whether language in the written word and how it was communicated, and so on, and how it works in the brain. So I hope over the course of these 5 programs of Planet Word, people will stop taking for granted what I think is the greatest gift we have.